Hello, wherever you are in the world. I'm Stuart Crainer, co-founder of Thinkers50, and I'm delighted to be here today to moderate what promises to be an interesting and important discussion. Our theme today is Growing Together. This is the title of a new white paper published by the Management Lab at Capgemini, Invent, and Thinkers50. The paper can be downloaded free of charge, and we'll be putting the link in the comments section shortly. The title summarizes what the paper is all about. The logic appears to me, at least, as hugely persuasive. The world will only become a better place if we work together. The great challenges the world faces, from inequality to climate change, demand responses built on collaboration and cooperation. Of course, making this a reality is a lot more complicated. And our discussion today will hopefully start our journey in cutting through this complexity. So to help begin the process of growing together, I'm joined by four stellar guests. We have Paolo Cervini. Paolo is the co-lead of Capgemini Invent's Management Lab, which is the group behind the white paper. Paolo is joined by Leon Prieto. Leon is a professor of management in the College of Business at Clayton State University. He is the co-author with Simone Phipps of African American Management History and won the Thinkers50 Breakthrough Idea Award in 2021 with Simone for their work on cooperative advantage. And we're also joined by Marc Reinhardt. Marc is the Executive Vice President for the Public Sector at Capgemini. Marc brings unique experience of the role of the public sector in bringing about transformation. And finally, and I'm working in alphabetical order, we have Christian Stadler. Christian is a professor of strategic management at Warwick Business School in the UK and co-author of the brilliant book, Open Strategy. Christian, Leon, Marc, and Paolo, welcome. Before we begin, I would like to thank everyone for joining us and invite you to proffer comments, questions, and observations as the discussion develops. We have 45 minutes, so there's plenty of time for questions, so let's get things started. I will invite each of our experts to offer their perspective. So let's start with Paolo Cervini. Paolo, can you take us through the genesis of the ideas behind this paper, Growing Together?
Thank you, Stuart, and welcome everybody. The idea was very simple. When you think about sustainability and when you think about platform and ecosystems, there is a keyword, which is a system or systemic. Sustainability, you all know that a single company can't do anything. They need to work together, cooperate together. When we come to platform and ecosystems, by design, these two models or construct are based on a systemic logic. So the 2 points are quite linked and related. As you can show in our couple of slides I will present you, our effort was really to support a publication as Capgemini Invent and as Thinkers50, which is based on the same logic, which is a logic of, let's say, involving many different people, brilliant minds from the academia, practitioners, into, let's say, a joint work, a joint effort. As you can see in this slide, first of all, I need to thank all these people. As I said, brilliant top professors, some of the leading authorities in platform and ecosystems. On the other side, you see the world of practice, which is our job, connecting the two worlds as Capgemini Invent. So from companies that are pioneering sustainability and ecosystems. And as you can see also, a lot of colleagues from Capgemini and Capgemini Invent, Marc is here, and this is a joint effort. Of course, we have some key messages that we want to stress, but we leverage on the contribution of each of these remarkable experts and leaders. So thanks again for this effort. There are three key messages that are also the chapters of the book. And today, our special guest will deep dive on them. The first one is very simple. As I said, why sustainability needs platform and ecosystem. And I would add also the other way around, why platform and ecosystem need sustainability to grow in a profitable and sustainable way. The second one is the role of public sector, and Marc will explain you. There is a strong need to have a more proactive public sector, more innovative, in the end orchestrating some of these ecosystems. The last point is a point I like a lot to stress. I think there is a general agreement that, let's say, platform ecosystem can be a good answer to many of these social and sustainability challenges. But we need to make it, let's say, concrete. We need to make it serious to some extent. And so it's extremely important to adopt a more scientific, quantitative, data-driven approach to define ecosystem models, to quantify the value creation, to quantify the value shared. That's my message. I think management science can help a lot, as you can see also in the publication in this chapter. That's a message that I would like to stress also because it will not be in the key topics of our guest. So I leave to you, I think it's Leon, if not wrong, or directly to Stuart. So thanks a lot, and here then for the questions.
Thank you, Paolo. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please send in your questions at any time. We've got people from Holland, United States, Sweden, Italy, Slovenia, Andorra, South Africa, Morocco, and elsewhere. Really appreciate you joining us. If you've got any views, questions, please send them in and I'll relay them to our guests. Thank you, Paolo. So now I'd like to invite Leon Prieto to share his take on it. Leon is the co-author with Simone of African American Management History. And check out, he's got an article coming out in MIT Sloan Management Review on facilitating the next golden age of Black business, coming out next week or so. Leon and Simone have written a lot about the idea of cooperative advantage. So working together is really at the core of their work. Leon, can you tell the audience a bit more about your work and your perspective?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, it's so great to have the discussion, especially with the theme being growing together. So cooperative advantage, it really stems from an African philosophy known as Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And those who are familiar with the work of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, that was one of the core philosophies that really made these gentlemen who they were. They really embodied that philosophy. And this philosophy is prevalent throughout many parts of Africa. So this whole concept of cooperative advantage, it really stems from that conceptualization of Ubuntu. So it encompasses engendering a spirit of care and community, meaningful dialogue, and an action-oriented consensus among individuals. And in the case within organizations and business in general, this means consensus among employees, customers, the community, and the entire value chain, right? And we decided to focus more on cooperative advantage because we felt as if management theory was mostly based on a lot of works in the early 20th century, which portrayed human beings as being individualistic, utility maximizing, transaction oriented. And that's part of who we are. We are driven by self-interest. And if I have to quote from Adam Smith, he's well known for his book, Wealth of Nations, but people tend to forget he wrote another book called Theory of Moral Sentiments. So we are not just motivated by self-interest, we are also motivated by empathy. We are empathetic beings, and Adam Smith wrote about that as well. But we tend to be very myopic and focus on the individualistic, self-serving aspect that makes up who we are as people. So cooperative advantage, it is trying to encourage a more balanced approach. And we came to the conclusion that, this approach can be very helpful, especially in the context of creating diverse and inclusive business ecosystems, ones that really have the potential to create, decent jobs, engendering social innovation, revitalizing marginalized communities. And we really have to underpin this on the sustainable development goals, because when if we really have to grow together by really embodying cooperative advantage, we must focus on social sustainability and community well-being. That has to be at the root of it. And having that spirit of care and community, it's very important for us to really focus on that now, especially due to um, the loss of biodiversity, and the climate crisis. In fact, there's a term that's very good right now that's being used called the poly crisis that we are facing on this planet. So we are faced with a number of different challenges, but we really need that ethic of care to really focus on the kinds of values that really embraces our planet's well-being, people's well-being, and everyone within that entire value chain, right? And coming off from the COVID-19 pandemic, which really hurt a number of businesses, and within my context in the United States, a lot of minority-owned businesses faced a lot of challenges prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic. And so we really need to consider the needs and preferences of um, a lot of businesses that were impacted, and especially minority enterprises and the clients that they served. So we really need to work hard on nurturing that sense of community within the business ecosystem. So we really need more support from corporations, government agencies, small businesses, and the entire community to ensure the survival of organizations and a lot of the small businesses that really hires a lot of people within my context in the United States.
Are you finding a different reaction these days, Leon, when you talk about cooperative advantage? Is it resonating more?
Yes, I think, I noticed a shift like during and after the pandemic. You know, people are really gravitating to humanism within business in general. And the work that I do with Simone Phipps, it revolves around African humanism, which really embodies the spirit of Ubuntu. So it's resonating with people. I've received number of requests to speak, and I think it has always resonated with us to a certain degree, but I guess we got a little bit too caught up with the works of Milton Friedman, and we kind of focused on the transaction oriented individualistic approach, but we are seeing the need for a more cooperative approach, and especially with this pandemic, we see the need to really grow together as a species, as a planet, to really bring forth the change that is needed now more than ever.
Thanks, Leon. I'd like to talk to the third member of our expert group today, Marc Reinhardt from Capgemini. Marc, you work with the public sector. What's your perspective on growing together?
Yeah, happy to contribute it. So thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Leon, also for your introduction and your contribution on Ubuntu. And I also believe that it's a super interesting and relevant concept for our times and our topic. And I'm happy to say that in more and more cases are now even see this being, even in the West, even in Europe, being taught in schools. And I think that's the way to.
Marc's frozen for the time being. Give him a few seconds. Well, perhaps we can move on seamlessly to Christian. Yeah, I think Marc's frozen in space. Christian is a professor at Warwick Business School, co-author of Open Strategy. I know you've just come back from time in Africa, so the idea of Ubuntu resonates with you, Christian. Can you tell us more about growing together and your take on it?
Yeah, so I mean, setting the context a little bit. Yeah, I came back because my wife is from there. Part, of course, why people work together is because there's no functioning social systems. So you rely on your family and friends if you have a big medical incident, or if you plan a wedding. So it's not just because people are fundamentally different. It's the whole social structure can only function this way. But getting back to the conversation today, when Paolo first approached me if I want to be involved in this, I was honestly surprised. I was surprised because I, frankly speaking, have not much expertise as we talk about sustainability. But it became clear in our conversations that the reason he approached me is because I do have some expertise in some of the techniques and tools that could help us to achieve sustainability. And that's where I guess the connection to open strategy comes in, where we need to find effective ways to work on big questions, on big topics. And that's essentially, in a corporate context strategy, but it translates quite well into a wider world. Now, one thing that is specific, I think, to open strategy that is useful here is that it's a relatively controlled way of involving large groups of people without turning everything into just a big vote at the very end. So, you have a guided conversation, for example, with one of these techniques where you can potentially involve many thousands of people on a specific topic. IBM is one of the companies who has a technology to do so, and they've organized, for example, a strategy jam around LGBTQ plus topics, where you have moderators who make sure as well that these things stay civil, because one of the problems with social media platforms is often that, on controversial topics in particular, that there's some people who just don't know how to contribute in a way that, makes the conversation still possible. They just want to disrupt. They want to maybe propose a particularly aggressive and extreme agenda on both sides of the aisle. So, having these guided conversations can be one potential way for us to drive towards solutions, which is, of course, what we want to get when we talk about sustainability.
Is there a neat definition of open strategy?
I can do it briefly, yeah. So, if you think about the traditional way of strategy making, we talk about a very small group of senior executives who sit together, old picture, smoke-filled room, a few white gentlemen in their late 50s deciding what's going to happen. But with multiple new challenges happening, probably that model doesn't provide creative answers. And possibly even more important, it struggles with convincing everyone else in an organization that the direction that looks so great in the boardroom is actually the right one for those working in the operational front end. So in other words, strategy needs to find ways to involve much larger groups of people. And you can do that through online forums. You can do that through workshops that involve larger groups of people. And the whole sort of, construct of open strategy does that, as I already said, in a way that doesn't give the final decision right away from the executives, but it enables them to involve more people. And the role of ecosystems within that? So, you can potentially use some of these ecosystems because it stretches beyond just the corporate boundaries. You can involve customers, you can involve other stakeholders that are important in this conversation. So, ecosystems naturally come into this. And the technology that enables platforms could potentially be used in this context as well as a tool.
Okay, thank you, Christian. We're re-established our connection to Marc, who can talk about public sector. You see the public sector as orchestrators, Marc.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm in the office, but somehow the connection dropped. I think it's the VPN. Anyways, technology fascinating, but sometimes also annoying. We're back, and now just to contribute a few thoughts. Here is some of my thinking, some fragments of my thinking might stimulate a discussion later on. They revolve around creating outcomes according to political priorities, collaboration in ecosystems, the role of public, and what this all means also for companies and citizens. So today, and I think also that has been established before, we're at a critical point where many of the topics, and among them, first maybe even among them sustainability, are crucial, and we're under huge pressure to get things done, and that all in a very short time. So what is requested today is not the typical plans or debates when you talk about the public sector, but outcomes. And what is requested of the public sector is that, first of all, well, they don't slow down these developments, and ideally they even speed them up on the way towards results. The public sector still today is often focused on procedure and works in an inside-out approach, which is also legitimate because its governance framework is one that is rule-based, but this governance and the order should not be getting in the way of results either. So the outcomes, the results we expect need to be clear, and they need to be at the center. That is the job of politics and of government. If we do not know what we aim for, it will be harder to achieve. And if we are not crystal clear also on what we want as outcomes, it will be harder to also prioritize in case some of the measures we're aiming for are getting into a conflict between themselves. So the state, I believe, needs to take a more active role, which also doesn't mean that everything needs to be done by the government and the administration, but that there is a need to translate the political goals and priorities into executable programs. These programs then need to be tackled combined, and that's again where we talk about the ecosystems and the together between administration, companies, and also civil society. Administrations can and I believe should steer this process, including finding the right partners also that can contribute to those goals. And they need to make sure that once we're on the way to solving them, we stay on target. And they also, as a government, need to probably, at least initially, provide the funding for it. And again, but this also has been said before, keep in mind many of the issues we face today are complex. They cannot be solved by one party alone. Whichever party that may be, even the biggest organizations that we have, will not be able to tackle things on their own. So that's the essential footprint and also the legitimacy of the ecosystem. And through that, there is a huge need for coordination and for orchestration. Competitors need to cooperate, but this will typically not happen if one of them tries to rule the ecosystem. So we need neutral parties to facilitate and to orchestrate. Governments have the right profile to take over such a role. Governments have no profit and therefore could be an honest broker to set rules and governments of collaboration. But also keep in mind, this is not an easy task. There are skills, techniques, and methods that are needed to make this work. And governments typically do not have these kind of skills, techniques, and methods. So they will need partners that can help them manage this task. And in parallel, and that's, in my opinion, also important for the likes of us, that can help them manage it, but also develop the necessary skills to fulfill that role in the long term. In this model, private companies will also need to take a look at their own goals and processes. In a purely profit-oriented company will not function in an ecosystem setting like that. And that's what Ubuntu teaches us. A player who does not think and act along those lines, who optimizes themselves at the expense of others, they will destroy the ecosystem or will at least need to be excluded from the ecosystem, which is also a role that a referee must take, and a referee like a public sector institution. And maybe just as a last point, to also look at the civil society, which still we haven't stressed enough maybe. The civil society will need to also take a hard look at themselves, at the expectations they have towards government and industry, and at the role that they can and should play in the ecosystem. They can no longer, in my opinion at least, just be passive consumers, demanding everything just to be fixed with a minimum effort or disruption on their part. It's a very common approach nowadays, especially in Europe, but many parts of the Western world, where people have become a little bit complacent and a little bit self-satisfied. But on the other hand, also, they should not elevate their role to unrealistic levels. So individual groupings of the civil society, first of all, can and should not claim to speak for the people. And also groups that get together ad hoc, for example, programming a solution during a hackathon, need to understand that such a solution will not necessarily work at scale in the complex setting of a public sector application landscape. So if all sides, and that's my conclusion, approach that challenge and the challenges that we face with the right mindset of responsibility, collaboration, and also a little bit of humbleness concerning their own role in the ecosystem, we might be able to not only deal with the problems that we're facing, but to develop, and that's, I think, what also has been approached before in the discussion, a new model that is desperately needed, I think, in times when democracy itself and the foundations of the systems we are used to are questioned in their ability to solve the problems of our times and give citizens, us, the best life that we deserve. So maybe that will suffice as a quick introductory statement. Back to you, Stuart.
Are the signs of change, Marc? When you talk to people in the public sector, others, or talk to people in broader society, is the kind of a shift underway in how we understand the role of the public sector?
I think it is. On the one hand, again, also here, a change brought about by the pandemic and by the poly crisis that we mentioned earlier. In the crisis, always people turn to the governments and expect the solution. So that's why over the last, 3-4 years, the role of government, I think, all over the world has increased. But that's why I try to caution that it should not be taken too far. And also, I see that many governments now try to step up into that role. Some, that's why I also made that point, exceed a little bit their mandate and try to take care of everything and do everything on their own. But at the end of the day, it's really the role of the public sector to look at the whole, to bring people together and to mobilize everybody along the goal to the solution. I think that's more important than really just, which is also sometimes a populist and easy answer, to be the ones that have all the answers and provide all the solutions and do it all. So I think it's time really we got together, and that is not yet fully achieved. The government's roles, they have stated the ambition. They maybe don't have all the skills, but they're stepping up. But the thinking, the realization that we need to do it all together, I think that is still in its infancy, and that's why it's important that we discussed it today.
Yeah, thank you for your comment, Diego, about the S of social. And Diego says, I think the big challenge is how to translate it into powerful actions for the communities and for the society in general, and how to use nudges to support this. One thing is always, I think, which kind of links what you've all said, is that the sharing of knowledge and best practice is extremely limited. Go to Marc's point. It's always staggered me when you move from country to country, even just driving through Germany, you see brilliant road signs, and then you drive home to the UK and there's different road signs, and they don't really work in the same way. That the sharing of knowledge between nations and even the public sector within the same country is, and I mean, that goes down to your idea of open strategy, Christian, that the willingness to share knowledge and best practice is extremely limited.
Yeah, and what we cannot forget is that whenever we talk about the public sector, they work, for the current government, whoever is in place, and they have a particular agenda that in some countries, and I guess Marc is joining us from Germany at the moment, has probably an agenda that is more open to sustainability topics than, say, the current Italian government is, particularly when you talk about social aspects, migration also. There's a strong anti-immigration sentiment in Italy. At the same time, there's a shortage of labor in Italy and many other countries. With Paolo, we have somebody who can tell us probably a bit more about this. So there's a strong ideological aspect as well. In few governments manage to look at solutions only. They look for solutions for a particular segment of their voters, which they hope to capture. What springs to my mind is a headline we had in the UK recently, that there's a disagreement between different government departments on whether they should make more stringent immigration rules for students. Now, higher education, and I obviously have a self-interest working there, is one of the big success stories of the United Kingdom. And, it doesn't take a genius to know that if you restrict the right to work for students from outside the UK, less of them will be coming. So, one of these actions of self-harm, but there's a certain slice of the voters who will find it attractive, and hence, some of the ministers in the current government think, hey, let's go after this slice. Yeah, we need to win the Midlands in a way.
I think it's interesting. Having done politics, we should probably move on to religion next. But I think your point's right, Christian, especially about regarding the UK. But I think what's interesting here as well is the idea of governance. I mean, Leon talked about kindness and empathy. Christian talked about openness, and we've also been talking about ecosystems. And I know, Paolo, your most recent work is talking about kindness and the role of kindness. And it's a strange combination, the governance of these very soft and abstract issues. Is governance of these things possible, Paolo?
It's difficult, but we believe that it's possible, and it's also necessary. And our approach, my thinking is that also on something like kindness, you need to make it practical. You need to make it quantitative. I know it's very difficult. I've worked a lot with Enel, the Italian multi-utility, on this, and really kindness is a key driver of, let's say, performance, of advantage, let's call competitive, but then cooperative advantage. And the key point here is that, as I said about ecosystem, you need to make it practical and quantitative. So kindness should be translated into actionable, concrete behaviors, ideally to be measured. And this is linked probably also to the question. We have quite a lot of indicators on the E, of the environmental part, even if there is a lot to do also on E. On the social part, on the people part, we need to develop stronger indicators and measurement. That's why we are also brainstorming about sort of kindness indicators. The point is that the ESG logic is the right one, but we need to find a strong and objective measure to drive this change. So kindness can be one of that. At the beginning, it looked like a bit a strange word, and we are so happy to see that it's becoming almost a must in some of this new leadership thinking.
Yeah, just think of Jacinda Ardern, the recently resigned as Prime Minister of New Zealand, as a leader demonstrating kindness and empathy. Leon, how does the idea of cooperative advantage, how do measures and governance fit into that?
Well, when it comes to cooperative advantage, I guess the next step is how do we measure it? And Paolo, he explained it, the need for it brilliantly. So we need to work on some key performance indicators within the different dimensions of cooperative advantage to really measure how do we look at kindness, as he mentioned. So we frame it as a spirit of care and community. How are these corporations really exhibiting the care they need for the entire value chain? You need to be able to quantify that as well. And there's some practical examples of some CEOs who are actually going beyond the call of duty when it comes to really engendering this spirit of care and community. For example, there's this company I admire, Askinosi Chocolates, and the CEO, Sean Askinosi, he has a very strong relationship with some of the smaller companies within his value chain. So a lot of the large corporations in the chocolate industry, they have been harshly criticized, and rightly so, because they didn't really do a good job really monitoring what's happening within their supply chain and things like modern day slavery, child labor, etc. But this gentleman, Sean Askinosi, actually flies to Tanzania and the Philippines and meet with these cocoa growers, and he works with them, and he incorporates open book management. There's a lot of transparency. He gives them a fair wage. So we have to be able to measure what some of these corporations are doing as it relates to really exhibiting care throughout the entire value chain, and make that best practice for others within the industry to follow. So Marc mentioned the need for competitors to start cooperating. We really need to do this to really bring the change that is needed now more than ever.
As a comment from Gina Cox, I love that governments can help us come together to find solutions rather than imposing predetermined solutions. Realize that this point of view actually feels novel these days. I suppose one of the issues with governments, Marc, is that they often kind of focus on the immediate solutions rather than the long-term problems.
Yeah, and it comes back to also what Christian said. It's the same concept of the ecosystem contributor or somebody who abuses and destroys the ecosystem. Also, a government can play that role. If a party or a part of a government only uses that the role they have been given by the voters to further their own power, to further their own influence, not look at the benefit and the best outcome for the society, then they're also detrimental to the ecosystem. So they will eventually also probably be held accountable to that. It's not a sustainable solution, but that's where it all starts. So yes, indeed, not all governments are equally charitable and equally enlightened when it comes to that. But I believe also here there is a change, and more that is the measure stick that we put up for the governments. On the other hand, when we say like governments need to bring people together, that's why for me it's the cities often that are quite good examples of that, because wherever the proximity is closer, like a mayor of a city has a natural role to bring everybody together. So if you look at smart cities, for example, this cannot function if, for example, the mayor or the government of that city does not bring the different parties together. You have different players that all have different standards, that all have different goals. And at the end of the day, you have to say, okay, what's best for our community? What's best for our city? And here is the different contributions that are assigned to you to play in that ecosystem. And in that smaller context, it can be felt more. I mean, one approach that I saw from IDC at the moment that we discussed with is that they look at even smaller ecosystems. They look at closed contained ecosystems like islands, for example, or ports or other things that are very contained, to see and really understand how, and under like a magnifying glass, those mechanisms are at work. So I think that could be also interesting aspects to evaluate also maybe for research on that. And just maybe one last thought on that. Yes, I do see a big change. And I also am convinced that the work that was done by the UN with the Sustainable Development Goals really made a big contribution and a big impact to that. While the Declaration of Human Rights has been around for a long, long time, it has not been, and that's what also Paolo mentioned, it has not been actionable. And the SDGs broke it down. They brought it down to concrete goals and concrete actions that you can take to get closer to those goals. And that made all the difference. And it really sharpened and focused everybody's mind and attention around those goals. And I think that's been beautiful. And it really mobilized also the different players and actors. And then you had incidents like the pandemic or so that even maybe accelerated this whole process, in some ways also delayed. But it really sharpened the mind of everybody, pushed a lot of people to take another hard look at their life and their life's purpose and what they're doing. Maybe some had more time to think during that time. So I think it really probably will only see it in hindsight what this period has done to really create an inflection point in our history, even though sometimes if you look at the press today, it doesn't yet feel like it, but I believe we're on the right path.
Oh, it's good that you're positive and optimistic, Marc.
Yeah, that's the way to go.
One thing that intrigues me is we talk a lot about ecosystems. I mean, Paolo was talking about eco. It seems to me they're by their very nature very ambiguous and messy. I've spent time at the Chinese company Hire, which holds great store by ecosystem, trying to understand how the company works and how things are related to each other. And it's frankly really difficult because there's a lot of the fast changing and often very ambiguous relationships. And that's a real difference from what's gone before, especially in the world of strategy, Christian.
Yeah, and I guess to some extent, we are best advised to accept that. Gary Hammer has done a lot of work on Hire as well, and he is, a big enemy of bureaucracy, which you naturally get if you have to maintain large systems in a controlled way. So a bit of, independence, letting operations do their own thing, and then maybe amplify those initiatives that are particularly good. That's a smart way. I would like to also say something about measurements, which relates to some extent sort of, to the leadership question. In the end, I'm closer to the corporate world than the government world, but in the end, in the corporate world, you need to have a way to achieve urgency, to create urgency around topics in sustainability in order to make people act. Otherwise, there's always a next quarter coming and you need to meet the numbers then. Warren East, who ran Rolls-Royce until recently, had a very smart way of doing that. So Rolls-Royce, for those who are not so familiar with the company, is not the one to produce the cars, but it's the part that produces the big engines for aircrafts. And the way he kind of, got the message across to his engineers is we are one product cycle away from being irrelevant. So, we can produce the conventional engines once more, but after that, and that's 10 years out, but nonetheless, R&D starts to work on these things earlier. After that, we need to have something that is, CO2 neutral. That creates the urgency. It's a smart way to think about it. So I think to some extent, if you think about measurements, we need to have a translation that leaders need to achieve that creates that urgency.
Paolo, I presume you disagree that with me, at least, that ecosystems are messy and beyond measurement because they change so quickly.
I agree with you that sometimes they are messy, and sometimes, like we said also in the publication, there is a bit of ecosystem theater. So companies are talking about ecosystem for everything, and in some cases we are just talking about partnerships. So on one hand, it makes sense. As Christian said, as you said, it's clear it's a more fluid way of organizing internally and externally. On the other hand, I think that, especially for some situations, some businesses, you need to try to simplify a bit the definition of ecosystems or of platform. I like a lot, and the theory, the model, Marshall Van Alst and Geoff Parker, platform revolution. In the end, in that case, you have a clear business model, which means that there are a lot of parties. There is someone in the middle, let's say, orchestrating the value exchanges, the data, and above all, you need to create and to measure network effect. Network effect means that if you add something to this ecosystem, there should be an increase in value for the ecosystem. And this is critical. If you're not able to measure that, it will become very, very difficult then to share the value in a fair way. And it will be also very difficult to assess different trade-offs. So I think that model, even if it's not 100% fitting with all the ecosystems, it can be a good approach to try to make it, let's say, more scientific. But that's also my personal opinion.
Peter Gisela and Scott Zimmerman have been having a debate in the comment section about Twitter as a platform and an ecosystem, as a demonstration of our ability or inability to grow together. So it's quite an interesting point that to some extent, I think Leon, we're kind of fighting against human nature in many ways. or am I just being pessimistic?
Well, this whole Twitter example, it's a good one. So Twitter can be a very useful tool, of course, and I've seen Twitter being used to amplify a number of like within my context, a lot of Black businesses, especially during the pandemic, and it helped engender a lot of Black businesses becoming part of wider business ecosystems. But at the same time, there's a dark side to Twitter as well, and there's a bit of controversy, especially with the owner and some of his views, But Twitter, it can be a very useful tool when it comes to engendering dialogue, especially, and ways to really promote the need for business ecosystems, especially within minority communities in different parts of the world, in the United States.
Scott Zimmerman makes a more general point about capitalism as well, and suggests that capitalism, where collaboration does exist within capitalism, it's used for price fixing and things like that, rather than actually making the world a better place. Is there a sense, Leon, that capitalism isn't built to allow us to grow together? Or is that just habitual behavior?
Well, capitalism needs to be underpinned with regenerative economics. If we're really serious about shared prosperity and really growing together. And there are a lot of critics to capitalism and a lot of pessimism in terms of how can we get out of this climate change crisis or this poly crisis in general. But I believe we can make a big difference if we put in the work. So all of the performances and theater needs to end. We need to be more intentional and more actionable when it comes to addressing some of these sustainable development goals, as was previously talked about earlier. So the goals are there. We know what they are. We need to really foster some meaningful collaboration between governments and corporations, small businesses, to really drive the change that is needed. But capitalism, as I said previously, we tend to focus on a few pages in Wealth of Nations and focus on the individualistic, self-serving nature of it. But we could also take a next page from the work of Adam Smith and focus on empathy and the ethic of care that is needed to make this capitalistic economic system works for the least among us.
Somebody on LinkedIn says the main problem is the long time vision that is missing, bureaucracy and people without the proper skills. I suppose from a strategic point of view, Christian, the appetite for long-term visions seems to have deteriorated over the decades. In the 60s, they were looking boldly ahead decades, whereas now the strategies tend to be more short-term.
Well, I don't have a problem with that as such. A definition of strategy as a answer to challenges, that's fine. You know, as long as you understand which challenges that are a bit further out, you need to already start tackling now. That's not a problem. And likewise, you know, could argue that some of the approaches that, you know, Meta takes, for example, that's fairly long term. Yeah, no one sees how this can ever make money, but maybe one day it does. I'm less pessimistic than you that the world has so fundamentally changed. As you know, I've previously worked on how companies succeed for 100 years and longer, and you know, some of those fundamental observations I made then, I see them among good companies today as much as I saw them in the past.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, Christian, as well, Leon's work goes back to the idea of cooperative advantage goes back to the 1920s and 30s, doesn't it, Leon?
Oh yes, yeah, the work of Charles Clinton Spaulding. You know, he was an African-American general president of a company called the North Carolina Mutual, and his work embodied the spirit of Ubuntu. And one point Marc was making earlier was the need for competitors to even collaborate. So he wrote this article called Dangerous Tendencies of Black Businesses, where he was offering advice to some of his competitors who were going out of business because they were expanding too quickly. Because he saw the need for even his competitors to be part of this vibrant Black business ecosystem that was needed to create a sustainable cities and communities that were important to the African American community. You know, so there's a lot we can learn from Charles Clinton Spaulding and others who really valued sustainable development within their communities, because I truly believe in order to move forward as a people, as a society, there are important lessons to learn from in the past, you know, so there are a lot we can learn from Charles Clinton Spaulding.
Yeah, it's interesting that we need to continually relearn the lessons from history. Some comments coming in. Thank you for Diego, and says we should link sustainability goals with directors' objectives and presumably remuneration. Gina Cox says, directed to you, Leon, an executive told me recently, I don't want to hear about ESG. You don't tell me how to run my business. So how do you communicate regenerative economics in a way that leaders will listen? I mean, I think that's coming across from everyone that the best practice, we've kind of got a good idea of what that is from what Marc says in the public sector, from what Leon was saying elsewhere, going back in history. We know what best practice is. So how do we communicate it? How do we get things moving in a way that and communicate it in a way that leaders will actually listen and do something?
Well, you know, government have to become involved as well in terms of smart public policies. But one thing we have noticed, sticks don't seem to work as well. Carrots tend to be more effective, you know, and some of us may believe in a combination of sticks and carrots, but more carrots. So basically, I mean incentives. So corporations, small businesses need to be incentivized in some way to really work on some of these sustainable development goals that we have to achieve in order for our future generations to thrive. So more carrots, less sticks. But if you utilize sticks, you have to really communicate the value of some of these measures.
And one of the things you've pointed out, Leon, is the gulf between small businesses and large businesses, and that relationship and the ecosystems around that are really important. Christian?
Yeah, so one thing, you know, that I thought of immediately is that sometimes a good scandal can help companies as well to think about that they need to change. And, you know, Dieselgate scandal is a great example for that. The entire car industry got crazy about e-vehicles because there was this scandal. And I think none of the car executives is saying, well, you don't tell me how to run my business. They'll say, well, you know, the customers care about this. I will actually, you know, try to produce e-vehicles.
Yeah. So we need more scandals.
We need more scandals, absolutely.
So what changes? What changes would you like to see in the short term? What can happen now to enable us to grow together? What would you like to see change in the short term? Because I think there's a general kind of consensus amongst us that the importance of growing together and collaboration and cooperation. What would you like to see change in your world soon?
Are you asking me? I wasn't sure.
You can go first, Christian.
All right, yeah. So I guess what I would like to see is that we don't fall back. At the moment, everyone is concerned about energy crisis, is concerned about immediate economic problems at the horizon. So easy to forget about some of those maybe long-term and lofty goals, where we need, as I said earlier, a way to translate this into urgency, and that way, hopefully, keep our eye on those sustainability issues.
Marc, what would you like to see change soon?
Yeah, let me also just pick up on a couple of points that were made earlier, and then I'll come to that. I don't think we need more scandals, but the fact that we have the scandals shows that there is more consciousness, that people are watching more closely what some of the corporations are doing, and that definitely is also something that changes the behaviors also of the players within the capitalism. And that's why I believe also when we talk about do we need more sticks or carrots, in a way also I believe, here's again the public sector leader speaking, but we need some fences, because if you have at least some borders that are designed, and within that border you still can use the carrots and other mechanisms and give some freedom for the individuals to move, then that's already helpful. But those fences need to be there, and that's I think where we can leverage. It's the same on Twitter, by the way. I mean, it's a potentially very good platform, can be used for many good things. But at some point, you need to define some fences, saying there's some behaviors, some activities that we will not tolerate, and we will enforce that. And like just as I mentioned earlier, for those that abuse the ecosystem, that destroy the ecosystem, we will remove them from the ecosystem. So that's an innovation in a way to that. And it has been brought about by, in that case, the EU and the public sector. And the same is also for capitalism. So the reason why some are thriving to the detriment of others is because the prices and the costs do not reflect what is really out there. So a lot of people in the past, a lot of companies have been making profits at the detriment of society. And once you start changing the pricing structure to include those costs into their costs that they actually have to calculate with, they will make different decisions. So I believe if you just improve the system while keeping the mechanisms which work, I mean, again, none of the systems are perfect, but I think it's been said by many very much more enlightened and smarter thinkers than me, but capitalism is the least dysfunctional. At least it has proven in some instances to work. So let's try to make that one work better. And maybe as a last comment, just looking forward in terms of what I would like to see, I believe indeed, again, coming back to the optimism, that there will be a collaboration, also collaboration of competitors, especially when we look at those really, really big, hairy goals, the transformations that we're facing. Because if you're in a small, relatively contained market, then it's maybe a cutthroat competition. But if you're entering a huge transformation like we're at the moment seeing with sustainability, energy changes, and so on, we will need to work together, and we will all need to collaborate. And in a way, Mariana Mazzucato has brought that up with her mission economy example of the moonshot and the Apollo mission. These kind of things would not be possible if different players do not work together to achieve those goals. So I think those are the goals we have to take as our vision. That's the direction we have to take, and on those we have to work together. There is still room for some competition in the smaller stuff. Let that happen, but let's work together on the big stuff. That would be my final petitum.
Thanks, Marc. That's really good. Scott Zimmerman says he likes the way you think, and he offers you a carrot by way of reward and motivation in one. Paolo, some final thoughts.
Yeah, just one word. In my opinion, a key word should be transparency. To make a system work, you need to be transparent. And this is critical now with all the digital technology is possible. So within the companies, outside the companies. That's the keyword. Understand it's not easy. It's also a matter of a mindset, of trust, but that's, in my opinion, the key step.
Paolo, thank you very much. I think we can agree that growing together is the big issue of our times. I'd like to thank our guests today. We're out of time. Marc Reinhardt from Capgemini. Thanks very much, Marc. Really appreciated your view. Christian Stadler from Warwick Business School, author of Open Strategy, and Leon Prieto from Clayton State. Check out Leon's next article come out in MIT Slow Management Review next week. And Paolo Cervini from the Management Lab at Capgemini Invent. Really appreciate you all joining us today, and please check out Growing Together, the white paper, which is available now. Thank you very much.
Been a pleasure.